A few months ago, I made a video called Obscure Mechanics in Thousand Year Door that compiled a ton of random and interesting facts that most people look over when it comes to that game. Obviously, since then, the Nintendo Switch remake of TTYD has come out, and inevitably it made some changes that addressed old oversights and even added some brand new obscure mechanics that I'm guessing most people haven't noticed on their first playthrough or two of the remake. I thought it would be fun to compile these once again for a new video, and since the game is so new and I've only had limited time to experience these quirks, I turned to crowdsourcing in order to be more thorough. So shoutouts to all the people who replied to this community post sharing what they know, and shoutouts to the TTYD Remake info gathering channel in the Glitzpit Discord server for being full of even more information. Now before we talk about the painstakingly insignificant changes that only the most brain-rotten people would ever notice or bring up, let's cover some of the more well-known but still obscure to the average player changes. The most talked about change in this category is definitely the power bounce nerf. I already talked about this at length in a previous challenge video, so I'll keep it brief here. Basically, in order to make power bounce harder to perform, the developers made the fourth bounce input frame perfect. This leads to most players losing power bounces after just 4 hits, which is still decent, but weak compared to its true potential. If you do manage to hit the frame perfect input, the timing loosens up for a few more bounces until going back to frame perfect at bounce number 8. In the original game, it was a predictable progression where the timings became harder as you got more bounces, but the remake has this annoying difficulty spike. There's a change to how level ups heal your party that was probably just meant to be a quality of life improvement, but actually ended up making a certain overpowered strategy a bit less broken. In the original game, whenever you reached 100 star points and leveled up, Mario and his active partner would be fully healed. This includes all of their HP, all of your FP, and all of the star power. However, none of your inactive party members get healed, so they'll remain at whatever HP they were before. This allowed for you to keep a partner at 1 HP to take advantage of Mega Rush or Power Rush indefinitely, as long as you made sure they weren't active when you ended a fight that resulted in a level up. The remake, however, changed it so that your entire team, active or not, gets healed upon level up. This makes it so you have to reset any partners you want to keep in peril between each and every level up, which is especially annoying during the Pita 100 trials. There's lots of back-to-back fights that will level you up super often, at least if it's your first run through on that save file. There's another kind of weird change they made that's a bit of a silver lining to this. Now, any partner that has 0 HP during a battle will be revived with 1 HP at the end of it. If the active partner is knocked out and Mario finishes the fight, you'll see a little 1 HP heart appear above them and revive them with a single health. If they aren't active at the end of the fight, they will still revive with 1 HP once that fight is over, but unfortunately you don't get the cute little heart animation. It is now no longer possible to have a partner with 0 HP in the overworld at all. Ultimately, this balances out the fact that peril partners don't last long by making it really easy to knock them down to 1 HP. But anyways, I'm sure a bunch of you know that stuff already, especially if you watched the pre-Hooktail Pit video I did for the remake, so let's move on. The sleep status effect was buffed significantly compared to the original game. Enemies used to have a 50-50 chance of waking up when attacked, but in the remake they can't be woken up by player attacks at all. They can, however, still be woken up by the stage. So this means that besides bad luck scenarios, Mario is able to essentially disable an enemy for 5 turns for only a couple FP. In order for Sleepy Stomp to gain this newfound strength, it had to take away from one of its fellow attack badges, and unfortunately, Hammer Throw had to take the fall. Hammer Throw is widely considered to be one of the worst badges in the original Thousand Year Door. It costs 2 FP to essentially use the hammer on any enemy slot instead of just the frontmost one. The problem with this is that so many other moves straight up outclass this, including default free-to-use partner moves, but this isn't a badge analysis video, so you get the idea. When I first picked up Hammer Throw in the remake, the description saying that it now pierced defense made me think that it got buffed and obsoleted Piercing Blow. But in reality, they made Hammer Throw even worse. It now only does 2 damage no matter what hammer upgrade you have. It can be increased by power pluses and stuff, but it's still just not a good choice at all. In terms of defense piercing options, Piercing Blow and Quake Hammer both pretty much entirely outclass it. Piercing Blow can't target any slot besides the front, but at least it can do actual measurable damage. Quake Hammer might be a little bit more expensive to equip and use in battle, but it still hits all enemies with base 2 damage, pierces their defense, and flips them over if they're flippable enemies like Koopas or Clefts. Another badge-related thing that was changed in the remake is actually a fix for an oversight in the programming of the original. During the final Dupless encounter in Chapter 4, the fight starts without Vivian due to her realizing that she was actually helping Mario all along. Of course, she comes around after a couple turns and joins the fray alongside Mario. Due to this story quirk, badges you have equipped did not affect Vivian during that fight. You could have 2 Power Plus Ps equipped, close calls, whatever, but none of that would do anything for her. It's hard saying if it was fixed intentionally or not, since it very well could have just been done correctly by accident while rebuilding the game in a new engine, but it's an obscure fix for an obscure problem, so it's perfect for this video. A badge change that was a huge buff, unlike what they did to Poor Hammer Throw, is that the first attack badge now costs 0 BP to equip compared to the 1 it cost in the original. This seems minor, but it actually does make it a lot more practical to use during the end game since you can just leave it equipped no matter what. I'd personally still just use Bump Attack by that point because it's easy to unequip a Power Plus and put on Bump Attack. I mean, you don't really need attack power if your enemies explode on contact. But first attack could also help if you decide to do any side questing, backtracking stuff during the main story. Another interesting thing that Power Bounce can do in the remake now is actually found in the badge menu itself. If you look at the description for Power Bounce, it has a built-in tracker for what your maximum power bounces are on that save file. This feature was built into this sign in the Pita 100 Trials entrance room in the original game, so it's cool that it's now able to be accessed anywhere. And if you're curious, this is my maximum score for power bounces on my save file that I'm currently working on 100%ing. I'm curious how you guys stack up, so let us know down below. And the final change I'll talk about in the badge category is the brand new Power Plus P badge you can find on top of this roof over here in Rogueport Sewers. This obviously isn't the only new badge or item placement in the game, but this one is worth mentioning because it's actually a pretty big buff to the progression of the game. It provides another late game attack buff for your partners, which makes a huge difference in their damage output, and it's available as soon as you get the Ultra Boots and get back to Rogueport. Remember that change I mentioned with Vivian gaining badge effects during the Dupless fight? That's actually not even the only oversight related to Vivian returning during that fight. I pointed out in the previous Obscure Mechanics video that it was possible with some setup to kill Dupless in a single turn. Entering the fight with Mario at 1 HP and equipping Mega Rush, Power Bounce, and a couple Power Pluses makes it pretty easy to steamroll Dupless in a single attack. If you do it this way, Vivian doesn't get a chance to show up and the fight immediately ends. Afterwards, the scene plays out as if she joined you anyway, since they did not account for being able to kill Dupless so quickly. The remake changed this in a way that I actually think is really cool. If you kill Dupless before Vivian returns, he will revive with a life mushroom in order to let the cinematics play out as intended. It's really such a fun detail that Dupless is able to use an item when transformed into Mario. He doesn't revive with a life mushroom if you kill him after Vivian shows up, so this is an Easter egg that you can only see if you manage to kill him on the first turn. Another change that honestly probably doesn't even count as obscure is the sequence difference in the Riddle Tower during Chapter 8. In the original, you were able to obtain all of the keys as soon as you reached the tower, but you couldn't place them or progress further until you got the star key from Gloomtail. In the remake, you now have to beat Gloomtail and place the star key before being able to access any of the key rooms. I suppose this change is fine, but I really liked the sense of mystery that came from obtaining all those keys and poking around and trying to find where they go, and then finally stumbling into Gloomtail and unlocking the way forward. Yet another obvious one, many more of the game's characters appear during the Shadow Queen cutscenes where they cheer Mario on. The much more complete roster adds to the impact that the scene has, truly showing everybody that Mario has met during the course of his adventure. Again, this doesn't really fall under the definition of obscure, but it's such a good change that I wanted to talk about it somewhere anyways. And on that note, I figured I'd also mention the Quiz Boo. I believe he appears in the hidden creepy steeple room after the completion of Chapter 4, but somebody will have to verify this since I've only talked to him in the post-game. He gives you a bunch of 3-question quizzes with the rewards getting better and the questions getting harder as you go until finally he hits you with a massive 15-question quiz. Some of the questions in this quiz are absolute bullshit, but it's pretty fun as bonus content. You have unlimited tries at the quiz, but you will have to restart it if you miss a single question. If and when you manage to answer all of them correctly, you're given a money badge, which used to be obtainable only through the Pianta Parlor in the original. This is fairly easy to miss, so I figured I'd point it out in case you hadn't heard of it yet. In my opinion, the mechanic changes that apply to battles are the most interesting since the original game was already regarded as having an incredibly solid and deep combat system. These changes also have ramifications on challenge runs and strategizing, so they're important to me for that reason too. Some enemy attacks are a lot more clear in this remake. Bandits and especially Ember enemies in the original had very difficult guard timings due to having vague visual cues, but now they have little movements in their animations before they're about to do damage. Don't get me wrong, these are still two of the most difficult timings in the game, but now it feels a lot more fair rather than being completely feel-based. Okay, now for a really obscure one. When using Power Bounce on Paratroopas or Parabuzzies in the original game, they would take all of the hits from Mario or Goombella and then fall down and be on their backs. Now, in the remake, they will be knocked onto their back during the attack and have 0 defense from the third bounce onward. It's a pretty niche change, but it's definitely a satisfying one. Flower Fuzzies have always been an interesting enemy that had their own set of quirks in the original. The main one that stuck out to me was this Flower Fuzzy that always fell off this ledge and got stuck in place, but of course this was fixed in the remake because, I mean, it's obvious. However, a really weird oversight they made in the remake is that Flower Fuzzies can now only target Mario for some reason. Regardless of if Mario's in the front or back slot, or if the Fuzzy chooses to suck FP or HP, it will target Mario no matter what. This means that Zap Tap completely defeats it since it will only ever target Mario and will get zapped before draining any of your stats. My best guess is that this oversight exists because of something to do with the Fuzzy only seeing Mario as a valid target to drain FP from, but also, even if he chooses to steal HP instead, he still only goes for Mario? Weird game. There's a few new attacks that some enemies have as well, including a couple changes that don't really make a whole lot of sense to me. The Frost Piranha can no longer inflict freeze with its bite attack because it now has an Ice Breath attack that works similarly to the Putrid Piranha's poison attack. It had always bothered me that there was this discrepancy between these really similar enemies, so I like that they made it more cohesive now. Now, one of those changes that I was saying I don't really understand is related to swooper type enemies. In the original, the purple swoopers could use the swoop attack, while the gray swoopulas and green swampires could only use the draining attack. Now, swoopulas gain access to the standard swoop attack in addition to their drain attack, which means they aren't completely walled by Zap Tap like they used to be. Interestingly enough, Swampires did not get this change and only have access to the draining attack, even though they're meant to be the strongest variety of swooper. And the weirdest part of this to me is that there's no visual telegraph from the swoopula as to which attack it's going to use. The animation looks exactly the same whether it swoops or drains. Bulky Bob-Ombs and Bobolks are some of the enemies I hate on the most in these games because of how weak they are compared to every other enemy near their levels. And apparently the remake has given us an entirely new reason to hate on them. Just like in the original, you can set their fuses off early by using a fire or explosion style attack. This sets off a chain reaction that explodes every other Bulky Bob-Omb on the field and damages everyone on screen according to their base attack and buffs. You used to get star points from killing them this way, but in the remake this is no longer the case. Detonating them early means you take all of the damage and forfeit the star points. This also applies to regular Bob-Ombs, but I feel like generally most people will experience this during Bulky Bob-Omb fights. This next one isn't really an enemy behavior, but this felt like the best spot in the video to put it. One of my favorite changes in the game is how they handled unsuperguardable attacks. Thousand Year Door had many attacks in the original Japanese version that couldn't be superguarded, and just a handful of them in the original English release. The remake chose to carry over the unsuperguardable attacks from the English release, which I already covered in the last Obscure Mechanics video, so I won't list all of them out here. Formerly, when faced against an unsuperguardable attack such as a Dragon Bite, no matter when you pressed A or B, your character would take damage as if you didn't guard at all. In the remake, however, you are able to time these unsuperguardable attacks, but you still take full damage from them. So visually, this means that the text does pop up for your guard, but it's tossed away and is purely for bragging rights. Once again, this feels very Easter eggy, so I think it's a ton of fun. The stage has a surprisingly deep set of mechanics in both versions of the game, but there were some changes in the remake that make it even more interesting and powerful. One of the most obvious ones is that fog can now appear on Mario's side of the field, the enemy's side, or both sides, while it could previously only appear on both sides at once. This adds even more depth and randomness to the fog evasion buffs, but you still have some control over it with Bobry, who is still able to clear fog with his explosion attack. In the original game, Bobry was the only partner that had an appeal with a function beyond gaining star power, as he was also able to clear fog with the explosion that happens during his appeal. In the remake, however, this appeal explosion only clears fog on your side of the field, meaning enemies can keep their evasion buff while you lose yours. That turns his marginally useful appeal into being marginally detrimental. Overall, I think the extra fog mechanics are a lot of fun and work out to be slightly beneficial towards the player. Another stage change that's beneficial towards the player is that stage objects now pierce defense. This includes every object, whether they do 1 damage like a stage light or 5 damage like the Bowser statue. Yes, there is a Bowser statue hazard, and no, it's actually not new to the game. It can only appear if you're level 30 or higher, and the odds of it appearing are actually seemingly increased in the remake. The same is all true for the Meteor stage hazard, which, again, is in the original game. Surprisingly, there were enough interesting tweaks to the Tattle Log in the remake that I actually think it's worth mentioning in this video. The Tattle Log isn't super important when it comes to playing casually or even challenge running, but bestiaries are always a really fun component of JRPGs regardless. Most notably, bosses that get fought multiple times throughout the story now have separate entries in the Tattle Log. This means there are 2 Beldum entries, 2 Bowser entries, etc, etc. In the original game, the entries would simply get updated upon fighting later versions of that character, and you would no longer be able to see the stats for the first encounter. There were a handful of typos in the Tattle Log that were in the original, and they got fixed in this version as well, most notably typos on enemy stats. It always bothered the hell out of me that the GameCube Tattle for Rock Hawk claimed he had 1 defense that he definitely did not have, but finally I can sleep well at night knowing that this is corrected in the most current published version of the game. A lesser known defense typo was also present in another Glitz Pit exclusive enemy's Tattle, the Red Spike Top. The GameCube version falsely claimed that it had 5 defense when he was actually programmed to have 4. Once again, the remake updated the text but kept the stats as originally programmed. Another super fun attention to detail kind of change is that the Tattle Log no longer spoils future locations in the game. In the original game, enemies had a set location that it would say they were native to, even if you were fighting them in the Glitz Pit or Pit at 100 Trials. This led to things like the Tattle Log saying green fuzzies were from Keelhaul Key even if you hadn't ever heard of that location before, or Pit at 100 Trials enemies saying they were from the Palace of Shadow even if you were attempting it before Chapter 8. Now, the Tattle Log will display whichever location you actually tattled them in for the first time, regardless of where they're native to. This also means that each player's Tattle Log is semi-personalized, as the location that you first tattle any given enemy is permanently recorded on that save file and can't be changed. And finally, let's round off this list with some item changes. I won't cover every single item location that was swapped around or anything because they did a whole lot of that, and it's not actually that interesting to point out that, OMG, there's an Ultra Shroom here now, wow! What is interesting though is just how much they changed the mystery box item of all things. If you use a mystery in the original, it can pick from the following items: Dried Shroom, Mushroom, Ultra Shroom, Honey Syrup, Jam and Jelly, Volt Shroom, Slow Shroom, Gradual Syrup, Repel Cape, Stopwatch, Fire Flower, Shooting Star, or Thunder Rage. The remake trimmed this down to just Mushroom, Honey Syrup, Stopwatch, Repel Cape, Fire Flower, Shooting Star, and Thunder Rage. Not only are there way less items to pick from, but this selection actually slightly changes over the course of the game. A mystery used during Chapter 1 can pick from that selection I just listed, but if used during Chapter 8, it replaces the Mushroom and Honey Syrup with an Ultra Mushroom and Jam and Jelly respectively. And I assume that using a mystery in the middle of the game would have a Super Mushroom and a Maple Syrup, but this item is so bad that I couldn't find any footage of somebody using it in the middle of the game, and didn't want to play through the entire game just for this one clip, so somebody will have to confirm if that part is true or false in the comments. And now, less obscure but still fun is the only new recipe in the Thousand Year Door remake, and that would be the motherfucking hottest dog. It's mentioned as seemingly a joke when you complete the businessman's trouble, but if you decide to go and try to actually combine a hot dog and a hot sauce, it will in fact yield a hottest dog. It's so funny to add only one new recipe and to make it the stupidest possible thing. Shoutouts to this game's sense of humor. And, well, I think that's all the obscure changes I have for you guys today. This is in no way a comprehensive list, as we're still uncovering a lot of the really hidden or rare stuff, but I thought it would be fun to make this video decently early into this game's life. I'll definitely be looking into making a follow-up for this video, since I'm pretty much certain we're gonna learn way more stuff about the game in the coming months and years, but for now, that's the end of this video. So, if you enjoyed it, make sure you get yourself subscribed to the channel and like the video and comment on it as well. These interactions are one of the driving factors that tell YouTube to push a channel's videos, so if you want to help my channel grow, then make sure to do all of that. And of course, massive shoutouts to all of the Bringle channel members for their continued support. If you want to get your name up here as well as get early access to new videos and behind the scenes posts, then hit the join button on the channel page. And no matter what you decide to do with all of these plugs that I put at the end of my videos, take care, guys.